Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Chris Watts case. You know, the one that really gripped the nation back in 2018.
Yeah,
You guys have sent us a ton of stuff about it. Articles, documentaries, even personal notes on the case.
amazing, yeah.
Just the sheer volume of stuff speaks to how deeply this tragedy resonated with people, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those cases that just seems to defy explanation, right, on the surface.
Mm.
A seemingly normal family man commits just an unimaginable act of violence. So the question we were really exploring today is what led Chris Watts down this dark path?
Right. It's not just about rehashing those headlines.
Right.
We really want to understand the why.
Exactly.
Before we get into, the chilling details of the crime itself, let's just start with the Watts family in general. Can you paint us a picture of their life before it all went wrong?
Sure. Chris and Shanann Watts were both originally from North Carolina.
Okay.
They met in, I believe, 2010 and married a couple years later and eventually settled in Frederick, Colorado.
Oh.
They had two beautiful daughters,
Yeah.
4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste.
Wow.
And Shanann was actually 15 weeks pregnant with their third child, a boy they were going to name Nico.
So a young family, a new home.
Yeah.
Sounds like the American dream, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I know you mentioned in your notes that there were some financial struggles, right?
Yeah, they filed for bankruptcy in 2015.
Oh, wow.
And that can just put a huge strain on any marriage.
Right. Of course.
However, Shanann, she was a very driven person. She was working from home, building a successful business, selling a health and wellness product called Thrive
Oh, yeah.
for Lavelle, a multi-level marketing company.
Ah, Thrive. I remember those patches and supplements. They were like everywhere on social media back then.
Oh, yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were huge. But it sounds like she was making it work, at least, on the surface.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward to August 2018. What were the events that first raised concerns about the family's well-being?
Yeah.
Well, it all started with Shanann returning home from a business trip to Arizona in the early hours of August 13th.
Okay.
Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off at around 2 a.m.
Oh, wow. So Chris was home with the girls while Shanann was away on this trip.
That's right.
Okay.
Later that day, Nicole became concerned because she couldn't get in touch with Shanann.
Okay.
Shanann had missed a doctor's appointment,
Uh-huh.
and she wasn't responding to texts, and she even missed a work meeting. It's very unlike her.
That's definitely not a good sign.
No,
And that's when Nicole decided to go check on Shanann at the house.
exactly.
Okay.
When Nicole went to the Watts house, no one answered the door.
Oh, no.
Now, Shanann's car was parked in the driveway,
Okay.
but her purse was missing, which was odd.
Yeah.
So Nicole got in touch with Chris, who was at work at the time, and together they decided to call the police.
The police arrive. And this is where the story takes, like, a really intriguing turn, right? Because at this point, Chris is giving everyone this impression of a very worried husband.
Absolutely. Initially, Chris played the role of the concerned husband perfectly.
Yeah.
He told the police that he had no idea where his family could be and claimed that he'd last seen Shanann at 5:15 that morning when he left for work.
And I remember those televised pleas he made for his family's safe return.
Oh, yeah.
It was heartbreaking to watch.
So I know.
And a lot of people felt so much sympathy for him.
Totally understandable. That's the thing about this case. It just, taps into our deepest fears about the safety of our loved ones,
Yeah.
But behind this facade of concern, the investigators, they were starting to notice some cracks in Chris's story.
Oh, okay.
The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation got involved.
Oh, wow.
And when Chris agreed to take a polygraph test,
Yeah.
he failed.
Polygraph tests are so fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, some people swear by their accuracy, while others just think that they can be manipulated.
Right.
What are your thoughts
Well,
on their reliability in investigations like this?
that's a really complex question.
Yeah.
Polygraphs measure physiological responses like heart rate, blood pressure, respiration. The idea is that when someone lies, these responses change,
Okay.
creating detectable patterns. But the interpretation of those patterns is very subjective.
Right.
And some individuals, particularly those with psychopathic tendencies, are very good at controlling their outward signs of anxiety.
So in Chris Watts' case, the failed polygraph was like a turning point.
Yeah.
It suggested he wasn't being truthful.
Yes. It definitely raised red flags for investigators.
Uh.
And it's at this point that the pressure just starts to mount on Chris. He confesses to his father that he killed Shanann, but initially tries to shift the blame,
What?
claiming that she had smothered their daughters in a fit of rage.
Oh, wow. That seems like a really desperate attempt to control the narrative,
Yeah.
to portray himself as less monstrous.
Yeah.
So what was the real story?
Right.
Where were Shanann and the girls?
Chris eventually led investigators to an Anadarko oil field where he worked.
Oh, no.
And it was there that they made a truly horrific discovery.
Oh, God.
The bodies of Bella and Celeste were found submerged in separate crude oil tanks.
Oh, that's just devastating
Yeah.
to think about those innocent little girls. And Shanann.
Shanann was buried in a shallow grave nearby.
It's just a chilling reminder of the brutality of his crimes, and that detail about him using those oil tanks, the small hatch he had to squeeze them through, the scratches found on Bella's body. It just adds another layer of horror to this already unimaginable act.
Yeah.
Why choose such a method?
It's a question that has haunted investigators and the public alike.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it speaks to the cold, calculated nature of his actions.
Right.
He wasn't just disposing of bodies, he was trying to erase them, to make them disappear. But there's also a psychological element to consider. Sometimes, the way a perpetrator chooses to dispose of a body can reveal something about their mental state, their relationship to the victim, even their own internal justifications for the crime.
So the oil tanks weren't just a convenient location. They were part of a larger, more sinister plan.
It certainly seems that way.
Wow.
And as we delve deeper into the investigation, we'll see how his attempts to cover his tracks start to unravel, revealing a web of lies and premeditation that completely contradicted his initial story of a grieving husband.
That's what I find so compelling about this case. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion,
Right.
revealing more and more disturbing truths with each new piece of evidence. And we haven't even touched on his motive yet.
Right.
Was it simply a desire to be with his new girlfriend? Or was there something more, like some deeper psychological trigger that led him down this path?
Right, exactly.
We'll continue to unpack this mystery after a quick word from our sponsors. So before the break, we were talking about how Chris Watts' carefully constructed facade really started to crumble.
Yeah.
You mentioned his attempts to cover his tracks. What was the evidence that really started to expose those lies?
Well, a really crucial piece of evidence came from a neighbor's security camera.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The footage showed Chris loading his truck in the early morning hours of August 13th,
Oh, wow.
the same day Shanann was reported missing.
So while he's telling the world he has no idea where his family is, he's actually moving their bodies.
Exactly.
Wow.
And there's another detail that contradicted his story. When he transported the bodies of his daughters to the oil site, they weren't in their car seats.
Oh, wow.
And this points to premeditation,
Yeah.
a very chilling thought that he had planned this horrific act in advance.
It seems like every new piece of information just makes this case even more disturbing. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that Chris Watts was having an affair at the time. He
Yeah.
was involved with a woman named Nicole Kessinger. Did she know about his family? Was she aware of his plans at all?
From what we know, Nicole Kessinger was completely unaware that Chris was married with children,
Wow.
let alone that he was planning to murder them.
Mm.
She was, in essence, an unwitting participant in this web of lies.
That's a whole other layer of tragedy to this story. So with the mounting evidence, the inconsistencies in his story, how did Chris Watts eventually confess to the murders?
Well, facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, Chris ultimately decided to take a plea deal.
Okay.
In exchange for revealing the full truth about what happened, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty.
I can only imagine the anguish that Shanann's family must have gone through during this time.
I know.
Did they support the plea deal?
They did. They didn't want to endure the trauma of a lengthy trial.
Right.
And they really wanted to ensure that Chris would never have the possibility of freedom.
They also wanted to avoid the risk of him, receiving a lesser sentence if the case went to trial.
Right, yeah. It's a decision no family should have to make.
Yeah.
But I understand their desire for, a definitive resolution. So what was the final sentence?
Chris Watts received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Wow.
3 of those sentences were for the murders of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. And 2 additional sentences were for other charges related to the crime.
So life behind bars with no chance of ever being released.
Right.
That's a heavy sentence, but one that fits the gravity of his crimes.
Absolutely. He also received an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and another 36 years for tampering with the bodies.
Given the nature of his crimes and the intense public outrage, I imagine he's not exactly the most popular inmate. Where is he serving his sentence? For his own safety, he was transferred to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. It's likely he would face, very serious threats if he had remained in the Colorado prison system.
That makes sense. Now, this case became a media sensation.
Yeah.
There were documentaries, news specials, even a Lifetime movie.
It's crazy.
It seems like everyone wanted to understand how something like this could happen. Why do you think this case in particular resonated with so many people?
I think it's because it challenges our fundamental assumptions about family and safety.
Right.
We tend to believe that our homes are our sanctuaries, that the people closest to us would never harm us.
Right.
And the Chris Watts case just shattered that illusion. It showed us that evil can really lurk in the most unexpected places,
Yeah.
even behind the facade of a seemingly ordinary family man.
You're right. It's a case that forces us to confront, the darker side of human nature. And that brings us back to the question of motive. Even with his confession and the evidence, the why remains elusive. We know about the affair, but was there something more at play?
That's where we need to delve into the psychology of family annihilators,
Okay.
a term used to describe individuals who murder their entire family. Often, these crimes are not impulsive acts of rage. They're planned and calculated.
Wow.
The perpetrator often feels a sense of ownership over their family, seeing them as extensions of themselves, possessions, rather than individuals with their own agency.
So it's almost like they believe that they have the right to decide the fate of their entire family.
In a twisted way, yes. And there's often a narcissistic element involved, a belief that they are the victim, that their actions are justified.
It's a chilling thought. And you mentioned that these crimes are often planned. Were there any indications that Chris Watts had been contemplating this act for a while?
Yeah.
Anything that might have foreshadowed this tragedy?
There are, and they're quite revealing. Initially, Chris claimed that he hadn't planned the murders, that it was a crime of passion, but in recent letters to a pen pal, he confessed to premeditation, admitting that he'd been plotting the murders for weeks.
So he was even more calculated than we initially thought. That changes our whole understanding of his mindset leading up to the murders.
It does. In these letters, he admitted to drugging Shanann with OxyContin, hoping to end her pregnancy. He believed that would make it easier for him to be with his girlfriend and start a new life.
He was willing to risk the lives of his wife and unborn child for a new relationship. That's a level of callousness that's hard to comprehend.
It is. And in another chilling confession, he revealed that he had initially tried to smother his daughters in their beds at home, but he wasn't successful.
To think about him standing over those little girls trying to take their lives, it's just evil. But these confessions, while horrifying, provide some valuable insights into his mindset. What can we learn from this new information?
These confessions paint a much darker picture of Chris Watts and his motivations. They highlight the premeditation, the manipulation, and the depths of his depravity. It's a stark reminder that we can't always judge a person by their outward appearance or their initial claims. Sometimes the truth is far more sinister.
It's a sobering thought. And, while we've been focusing on the specifics of the Chris Watts case, it's important to remember that family annihilators often present a very different persona to the outside world. They can be charming, well-liked, seemingly devoted parents.
Exactly. This case serves as a reminder that we can never truly know what goes on behind closed doors.
Right.
It underscores the importance of paying attention to red flags, things like controlling behavior, isolation of a partner, financial abuse, or threats of violence.
You're absolutely right. This case is a stark reminder that evil can lurk in unexpected places. But it's also a call to action. We can't afford to be complacent. We have to educate ourselves, support victims, and work to create a world where tragedies like this are a thing of the past. We were talking about, the importance of recognizing those warning signs in potentially abusive relationships.
Yep.
You mentioned controlling behavior, isolation, financial abuse, and threats of violence. These are all incredibly serious issues.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what those red flags might look like in a real-world setting?
Absolutely. It's crucial to understand that domestic violence isn't always physical.
Right.
It can be emotional, psychological, or financial. And often, it's a combination of all of these. It's really about power and control.
You mentioned financial abuse earlier.
Yeah.
Can you give us some concrete examples of what that might look like?
Sure. Financial abuse can take many forms.
Okay.
It could be restricting a partner's access to money, sabotaging their employment opportunities,
Oh, wow.
running up debt in their name, or even forcing them to hand over their paychecks.
Yeah.
It's about creating a situation where the victim is financially dependent on the abuser,
Right.
making it that much harder to leave.
And in the Watts case, we know that they had filed for bankruptcy, a few years before the murders. Do you think that financial stress could contributed to the dynamic that ultimately led to this tragedy?
It's impossible to say for certain, but financial pressure can absolutely exacerbate existing problems in a relationship.
Right.
It's certainly possible that it contributed to a sense of frustration and resentment that Chris Watts may have been feeling.
And in his confessions, he did talk about feeling suffocated by Shanann, like she was controlling his life. Do you think there's any validity to that claim?
It's it's important to remember that those were his perceptions, his attempts to justify his actions.
Yeah.
We only have his side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear that he was trying to manipulate the narrative to portray himself in a more sympathetic light. We'll never know Shanann's side of the story,
Right.
but it's crucial to avoid victim blaming in these situations. Regardless of any relationship difficulties they may have been having, nothing justifies the horrific acts he committed.
That's an important point. This case has been a real roller coaster of emotions. And it's easy to get caught up in trying to understand Chris Watts' motivations. But ultimately, this is about the victims. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn child, Nico. Their lives were tragically cut short, and that's what we should never lose sight of.
I completely agree. It's also crucial to remember that while this case garnered national attention, it's not an isolated incident.
Right.
Family annihilators often present a carefully crafted persona to the outside world.
Right.
They could be charming, well-liked, seemingly devoted parents. It's a reminder that we need to be aware of the signs of domestic violence.
Yeah.
Not just physical abuse, but emotional, psychological, and financial abuse as well.
So what can we do? If we suspect that someone might be in a dangerous situation, what steps can we take?
First and foremost, believe them.
Yeah.
Listen without judgment and offer support. Encourage them to reach out to a domestic violence hotline or a trusted friend or family member. There are resources available to help, but it often takes a network of support to escape a dangerous situation.
This deep dive has been it's been a harrowing journey, but it's been an important one. The Chris Watts case, while horrific, offers valuable lessons about the hidden nature of domestic violence, the psychology of family annihilators, and the importance of recognizing warning signs.
Yeah, and even though this specific case is closed, the conversation shouldn't end here.
Right.
If you're interested in learning more about the psychology behind family annihilators or exploring resources related to domestic violence, we encourage you to delve deeper into this topic. Knowledge is power, and by understanding the dynamics of abuse, we can all play a role in preventing future tragedies.
Thank you for joining us on this difficult but necessary journey. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.